So you can tell there's a lot of evaluation here because we're on to our second video for just the evaluation. So let's have a think about the negative evaluation. Now, the first thing we need to think about is that remember Oswald says that sleep is essential for restoration of body and of mind. Slow wave sleep for the body and REM sleep for the brain. Let's say brain rather than mind. Now, the first piece of negative evaluation is it's not entirely clear that that is actually true. And what we mean by that is that when we deprive people of sleep, there's no common and specific consequences of doing that, right? So when we deprive someone of sleep, if it was essential for restoration of brain and body, we'd see the same responses and it'd be super, super negative and presumably eventually would lead to death, I guess. Um, but actually, when we look at case studies, there are not necessarily clear negative consequences of sleep deprivation. So, for example, DJ Peter Tripp, who stayed awake for 201 hours and did so, I think, on the radio the whole time, and Randy Gardner, who stayed awake for 11 days straight, which is insane to me. There appear to be no consequences that occur in all circumstances. Some people become paranoid or hallucinate, others seem to suffer no real negative consequences. Sadly, we're not going to have the stay awake this year, but in previous years when I've done the stay awake, some people cope remarkably well with not getting any sleep. Some people are in absolute state. Some people just need to go to sleep afterwards for a normal amount and then they're fine. Some people are not quite right for days afterwards. So the sleep deprivation seems to have completely different consequences on different people. And so it's really hard for us to say, well, actually, this is the obvious negative consequence, therefore, obviously, sleep is necessary for restoration, because that's just not the case. Of course, the big issue with this is that we have no real good scientific data on sleep deprivation because it's super unethical to stop people sleeping. And so often we have kind of case studies where people are doing it anyway, or you have situations where people have something like insomnia. In those cases, there's a lot of other factors getting in the way. If they have insomnia, well, maybe that factor is what's affecting all of the other data that you're gathering. So it's hard to measure sleep deprivation. Um, And this kind of idea of it's hard to measure things comes up with our second big criticism, which is that a lot of the evidence for restoration theory, as you might notice from previous bits, is that they rely way too heavily on animal studies. Okay, there's not enough data supporting restoration theory in humans. We might not be able to generalize from these theories to humans, and it's risky to draw conclusions based solely on the study of animals, and in most cases based solely on the study of one type of animal. Um, so an example of this is Rechtschaffen et al. Rechtschaffen et al. Yeah. Oh my goodness. 1983. And Rechtschaffen et al. Wanted to look at sleep deprivation. So they forced rats to stay awake. And basically they put them on this disc, and every time the rats started to go to sleep, they spun the disc, so woke them up. All right, so they just didn't give them a chance to get to sleep. And they found that after 33 days, the sleep deprived rats all died. Right, they just died. Okay, so Rechtschaffen and Al were like, well, clearly sleep is essential for life. It's clearly support for the restoration theory because if you don't get enough sleep, you die. But many people since have criticized this. I mean, it's super against animal rights and things like that. But also they said that maybe it wasn't sleep that killed the rats. Maybe it was like stress and cardiac arrest from being like forcibly woken up every time they tried to go to sleep. So you can't really just say, well, it's because they didn't sleep. Maybe it's because they were like shook awake and like had this weird spinning sensation. And actually, there was a similar study done on pigeons who seemed to be less stressed. I don't know, pigeons all seem pretty chill. They did the same study on pigeons, or similar study on pigeons, and they found that there were no ill effects at all. They could be kept awake for days and days and days. And that study was by, and I kid you not, it was by Rattenborg et al. In 2005. I wish I was making this up. It would make things easier. So there are also some of the other studies that have been done oppose this idea that sleep is needed for restoration, and these are particularly studies of exercise. So we've said that, according to Oswald, um, slow wave sleep is needed to restore the body, right? So that would mean that increased physical exercise should lead to more need for sleep, right? Because if there's more damage to the body or the body is more worn out, then we should need more sleep to restore it back up to the right level, if that makes sense. And there is some data for that. Shapiro et al. In 1981, they did find that marathon runners slept a bit more for the 2 nights following the race, but there's very few other studies that back that up. So there's some questions of, well, maybe that study actually wasn't as valid as they thought it was. And in fact, Horn and Menard, 1985, did a study specifically to test this idea. So they gave participants a huge number of exhausting tasks, picking things up, moving them around, running them around, basically wearing them out. And their theory was, well, if we completely wear them out, then they should sleep more, according to restoration theory anyway, because they've got more restoring to do. So they wore them out entirely, but they found that, yes, the participants went to sleep quicker, but they didn't sleep for any longer than usual. So that seems to go against this idea that restoration theory that sleep is needed to restore the body, because if it was, then surely getting exhausted would require more restoration and more sleep.